You are about to journey against the current of contemporary thought and beyond the troubled waters of daily news to the very source of our extraordinary culture. You are going upstream with Cashel and Edge.
Well, Lloyd, now that you're busily rubbing your eye there, I thought I'd start the show.
Oh, good.
I want to make sure your vision is clear.
Getting the sleep out. You know, it's 2 p.m. and I'm just getting up.
Rolling out of bed just a little while ago. And we are back in our remodeled studio here at Real Media. We had to take a little break so they could.
Pretty cool.
They did a great job, and you know there's a full service enterprise here in Overland Park, Kansas, and they've been very kind to us, and we appreciate it. And now I think it was worth it to take a couple weeks off to be in this special space.
Yeah, it's better than ever.
Yeah, and our shows will be better than ever. Thus.
Oh man, you're putting the pressure on.
I know it's hard to imagine that they could be better than they have been in the past. But
we're going to prepare now? Is that what we're going to do?
No, we wouldn't.
Do research?
We don't want to ruin the spontaneity.
Okay.
Actually, our preparation is the many years we spent on Earth before we came into the studio.
All the aggravations we've had.
You know, when I listen to...
Why?
I listen to young podcasts. Many of them are very good at what they do. But, I heard this one guy saying, he was talking about Donald Trump. He was the best president in my lifetime. Well, that may be true, but you have a very small lifetime. You weren't around for Ronald Reagan. Or Dwight Eisenhower, let alone Dwight Eisenhower. So they have narrow frames of reference where we have an expansive frame of reference. Mine, for better or for worse, a little more expansive than yours, not by much, but...
Recency bias, which is something I think we might talk about.
Well, we'll do it next week. We'll do recency bias. Today, though, I like your topic, penance by proxy. Why don't you tell us about that?
Well, I was trying. It kind of came to me that, what's the cause behind all this acting out that the leftists constantly do? And it seems like one of the things they have in common is this is the secular humanists, the people that have what some people call a God hole. We innately kind of negotiate with God.
Right.
Catholics are great at it.
Yes.
I mean, we've institutionalized it to such a degree that we've got confession and, the whole...
We have intermediaries.
We've got intermediaries. We do it. I mean, we take it seriously.
Right.
When you've got shame,
right,
they give you a place to get control of that shame and negotiate with God. And
right. That's the phrase mea culpa.
Yeah.
Mea maxima culpa, My fault, my most grievous fault, right? Mm-hmm. So we have an opportunity to acknowledge that every Sunday. Mm-hmm. And specifically in confession.
That's right.
And if not in confession, like most Christians, with a kind of an ongoing dialogue with God. And
I think if you look at other religions too, the people that feel that they walk with God in some way, they have communication with the higher power.
Right.
People who are infinite sum thinkers, usually.
Right.
They're capable of realizing they believe there's something outside of this earthly, outside of humans. There's something beyond.
Right, which is true of essentially of all cultures everywhere for all time, except for recent developments.
Yeah, and this is tied to, the shame is tied to narcissism.
Uh-huh.
If you talk to any of these psychologists, psychiatrists study narcissism, and they all say it's deeply shame-based. Well, I started connecting those dots, and I realized they got no place to put the shame. So, as a result, the world becomes kind of their the world stage is sort of their religion in total.
Yeah.
And so you see people who what they'll do is that, like they do with everything else, projection.
Right.
Projection is the way they deal with this. So they find It's kind of unique because they want to find people that they can see themselves in, that they identify with. That's their prime target. So you see why do white people rage at other white people and chastise them and shout them and shame them, shame, shame, shame.
Right.
All the mad at daddy, as I call the left, the Democrat Party is the mad at daddy party.
Absolutely.
So they're getting back in the ways that they can without, like you say, the priest, the intermediary that we have,
right.
or that other religions where you just pray and you talk to God. I'm sorry. The sackcloth and ashes. Hey, are we good? God, are we good? I mean, I'm going to do better, and I'm sorry. I mortify myself. And then you walk away, and it's like, okay, we're going to start fresh.
Right. And you'll say, I think most Christians go through this ritual, a personal ritual, and you'll say, okay, God, I'm not perfect. It's a little mercy,
right.
a little, and ours is a religion of mercy. We expect that. Don't be too judgmental I'll try to do better. I'll try to do my best.
But if you can't do that.
Right. What do?
You attack other people and blame them and then shame them. And, misery loves company, right?
Right.
You've got your collective sort of, what was it? I heard Glenn Beck used to call it collective salvation or something.
That sounds right.
But it's finding that relief by lashing out at others and often blaming them for, it's typical you're person that, they have a pampered lifestyle. They don't really contribute anything.
Right.
Yet they drive around in a big car and they're burning up all these fossil fuels, and they feel so ashamed, but they're not going to quit doing it.
No, what they do is they relieve them. It's like they're buying credits, right?
That's
it's like
right.
Carbon credits for your soul, right?
For your soul.
So
Bingo.
You can't.
Well
you don't
done.
You want to give up your own lifestyle.
Right.
So to the degree you can, you'll purchase credit to yourself by singling out other people who deserve the blame.
That's right.
And it's a very involved ritual. But, when we were talking about this, I was thinking, though, back how universal is the instinct to speak to the Creator, right? Mm-hmm. And so can you imagine, though, you're sitting around some campfire someplace like 8,000 years ago and, in the Algonquin nation or something, and you're praying to the God of squirrels that he provides enough squirrels for your hunting, And then someone says, sitting on the other side of the campfire, goes, I'm not into this squirrel God stuff, right? Like, I don't believe in a squirrel God. I believe that, that we are capable of reason ourselves, and that squirrels are a product of a long form of evolution. And then in his dying breath says, no, I don't believe in a squirrel God. Then he chop his head off and he's gone. No, because so instinctive is the desire to connect with the Godhead that it's almost unheard of in other cultures that you would deny it or reject it or even question it. I trace this back. There's lots of jumping off points, but I think one big one was the French Revolution, where that during the Age of Reason, right, where they desecrated Notre Dame, the cathedral, and renamed it the Temple of Reason.
There you go.
As though they were going to be wiser than God.
That's right.
Just like, in a sense, it's the original sin. Adam and Eve thought, by eating from the tree of good and evil, they could be wiser than God. It was a mistake then. They recognized it, though. They paid the price. And they were immediately ashamed, right? But now we project that shame. We get shame credits, and we project them on other people.
The yard signs are part of it.
Right.
You can look at all these this outrage, and now after thinking about this in this way, I realize you're hearing their shame, and it's really pathetic. But you can look at other faiths like the Jewish faith. You've heard, you hear about all these terms like self-loathing Jews and all these things.
Right.
Well, you've got Orthodox, conservative, Reform. They all have a presence of God, if they're at all religious.
Right.
And then you have secular Jews who have problems with that.
Right.
And so that's where that whole self-loathing thing or whatever, I think, comes from. That projection is the outward manifestation.
Right. It's an embarrassment about the way you feel about your culture, but you've escaped that, but your lesser informed brethren have not. So you have to project your self-hatred onto them. And that worked well in Germany in the 1930s for a while, until it didn't. The assimilation was not quite as successful as Jews thought it was, at least the secular Jews did. I think the religious Jews always knew they were the other, you know. Yeah, it's an evolved phenomenon, and it is probably the driving phenomenon today that explains so much of what is essentially wrong with the culture.
The reparations movement's a good example. Right?
Yeah, totally.
You scratch your head and you go, well, why would anybody think that makes sense?
Yeah.
It's not linear thinking. There's nothing logical about this.
Right.
And where did it come from? But yet people will line up. You know, all the white people that wring their hands and clutch their pearls and they're down with it, you know. Where'd that come from? It's shame.
Yeah.
They're embarrassed, they're shameful. And they're not deep thinkers. They're narcissistic because they've forced themselves into that by denial of God. And you know, a lot of people you hear it referred to as the God hole.
Right.
Where human beings have that innate drive.
No, and reparations is a good example because what you're doing is you're buying shame credits. So you don't have to do anything. Maybe your taxes go up by 1.0% or something at some point, but you are projecting your inner sense of guilt onto another group of people who are not around to defend themselves or not around to explain themselves. You know,
that's what that one guy referred to in the Obama campaign as the magic Negro.
Yes.
You remember that
That's
phrase?
Right.
And that goes back quite a way. I don't remember who exactly coined that.
It was someone on the left.
I mean, before that, they were referring to something that had been around a while.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Somebody wrote a book about it or something.
Right.
But that's that projection.
Yeah. You know, it's interesting because I was just today, actually, I was just scrolling around YouTube, and I came across this thing on Christopher Columbus, which intrigued me. And I had recently read a couple of books on the conquistadors in their own words. Fascinating book, because they were diarists. They kept pretty extensive notes and catalogs of their comings and goings.
Well, they were sponsored by people. I think they pretty much had to
have a
good report.
Right, exactly.
Or they ain't going
hey,
back.
Chris, we gave you $8 million for pesos or whatever. What happened to them? Dineros, you know. And Christopher Columbus, a fascinating character, much better character than anyone gives him credit for. But the guy who was doing the podcast, or the explanation did, he started off by showing the Howard Zinn take on Christopher Columbus.
Oh, yeah.
And then a book by some other guy who wrote a book called What Your School Teachers Haven't Told You, right? Another total smear. And they're ahistorical, you know? And then this guy went back into their accounts. And, you know, they brought a priest along with them who was a scold, you know, who was constantly telling them what's good, what's bad, you shouldn't be doing this, you shouldn't be doing that. There was a whole set of values, they're very Christian, that they brought to the New World. And you also brought a lot of, you know, brigands along who were, you know, the second sons of nobility who were trying to just make a buck, you know, and then care about religion or saving the natives or Christianizing them, which they thought that was a great gift. They thought they were bringing Christianity to the world, which I think puts black Christians in an odd place when they start complaining about, you know, the 1492, that was it, the 1619 people. You know, among the gifts you got coming here was Christianity, which for many, many millions of black people has been the center of their life and culture. So that wasn't intrinsic to Africa. That was a compensation almost for what you got, not to mention a great American lifestyle. So your ancestors paid. You didn't. My ancestors didn't have anything to do with enslaving them. Mine were in Ireland eating, old potatoes and, dying in the side of the field. But were asked to participate in this great ritual in which one side gets the shame and the other side gets to be shamed, even though neither side deserves the shaming or the shamed.
Collective salvation.
Collective salvation.
Yeah, my folks were Quakers that came over here, so
they
weren't doing slavery either.
Yeah, right. It's odd. This is like a little historical note. It's sort of an off the topic thing, but I was watching this documentary on PBS about Benjamin Franklin, unaware that it was made by Ken Burns. Had I known that Ken Burns had made it, I wouldn't have watched it.
You didn't see the Ken Burns thumbprint all over
no,
it?
No.
Or did he mix it up a little?
It's about Benjamin Franklin, right?
Yeah, but the style.
The style was the same, but it's just regular documentary style. I could have done it.
Everybody's knocking him off these days.
Right,
anyway.
right. And he was knocking off people who've been doing it for a long time. He just made them more boring and more guilt-ridden, But Benjamin Franklin's hard to guilt trip. So there's very little about it. But what I found fascinating was that they were explaining how Benjamin Franklin designed, and why, I didn't know this, the Gadsden flag.
Okay.
Are you familiar with the Gadsden flag?
Don't tread on me with the snake.
Right. And
it's got a resurgence going on.
Right, right. Now, here's the thing. I'm thinking once I learned that Ken Burns did this, it's a total pathological TDS, trumpeter.
Yeah.
Outspoken. And he's talking about the 13 rattles, together, and he explains that, how they...
The chopped up snake one?
Right. No, this is... He chose the rattlesnake, the American timbers, because I think it was intrinsic to him, to America. I don't think it was any place native to America. And there's 13 little things on the rattle, that any one of them are useless, but together 13, do variously bad, are forceful. Unaware that Ken Burns is celebrating the Gadsden flag, unaware that the FBI, I'm sure, has made it as a symbol, marked it as a symbol of domestic terrorism, which is, again, part of that projection. Mm-hmm. So we burned down the cities of America for a whole summer,
But that's their God, humanism.
Right. That's right. And our protests are largely peaceful. Then we project all of our
transgressions
onto a relatively, and to a protest that could be called a largely peaceful protest with a straight face.
But it becomes an I word.
Right. But they haven't mastered all the symbiology. So Burns doesn't know this. He knows so little about the J6 movement that he doesn't know that was a major symbol.
Really?
Yeah. Or that Roseanne Boylan, one of the two women who was killed on January 6th, was carrying that flag over her shoulder. So, and yet here he is talking about it. Oh, the Gadsden flag, So they haven't caught on fully to what they should know and what they shouldn't know. But they have caught on to the fact that they're blameless, you're not, that they'll project whatever internal misgivings they might feel onto you.
And an interesting thing about that, the things that they know that if they give people an outlet for this, they'll get a crowd and people will rush in because that gives them what they're seeking. This is why it becomes a religion.
Right.
And everybody goes, well, this is not really political. This is religious.
Right.
Yeah, it is. It serves that to fill that God hole. It's not a religion except narcissism. We're God. You're God. It's total narcissism.
Right, exactly. I'm it.
And yeah.
I was going to say, what the emptiness I thought was visible on the night of, I guess, November 8th, 2016, at the Javits Center in New York when the election results came in, right? Mm-hmm. Now, when one of our candidates loses, we may get pissed off or frustrated or angry or whatever.
We're thinking, what's next? What do we do? How do we fix this?
We don't do. That was normative.
It was. And I got to say, hilarious.
Hilarious. And then That a Friday of that week, the Friday after that Tuesday, for instance, Sergey Brin, who was the CEO then of Google, calls an all-hands meeting, right? And people are openly weeping and hugging each other, and he's encouraging them to do this because they're not real adults anymore. They're godless minions of a secular world order that they don't even begin to understand.
Mm-hmm. And God says, vengeance is mine, and they're God. So what do? They get busy on the vengeance.
They're big on that. They're good on that. They've kind of mastered that, at least for the time being. I think it'll catch up with them, but I hope sooner than later. You know, I wrote a book in 2015 called The Scarlet Letters.
Yes.
And, you know, where most of us are familiar with the original Nathaniel Hawthorne book, I should say most of us who are either over 40 or homeschooled, you know, right? If you're under 40, you've been reading Heather as two mommies, and, you know, not all boys are blue or whatever.
Which, by the way, is why it's so vilified by the left, homeschooling.
Yeah.
Because it gives you a connection to history.
Oh, totally.
And you are completely, purposefully separated from history. They're doing the George Orwell crap on people all the time in the schools.
Yes.
In the public schools. It's like their main goal.
Yeah. You know, to that end, and I may have told this story in the air before, but it's a good story. They, about 20 years ago, we did a documentary on Holocaust. We did an adult version, interviewing Holocaust survivors. This is in Midwest Holocaust Center. And then we decided to do an adolescent version. And so what we did is we just happened to stumble into this little convention of 15-year-olds who were from all over the metropolitan area, all different schools, faiths, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And so I said, let's interview a dozen of them, see what they know about the Holocaust, and then we'll make that the introduction to the documentary. And so we started. I talked to the first girl. They're all 15-ish, and she was public school, Kansas City, pretty nice. And I didn't want to just jump in, say, hey, what do you know about the Holocaust? And they didn't. None of the kids knew what we were going to talk about.
You got to be careful you don't look like you're punching down.
Right. So I said, oh, hi, where are you from? Where do you go to school? Blah, blah, blah. Oh, what's your favorite subject? And she said, history. And I said, oh, what's your favorite time in American history? What interests you most? She goes, oh, I like the period of the Revolutionary War. I was like, wow, this kid's doing pretty well. And I said, tell me about it. What's your take on the Revolutionary War? And she said, well, that was that the Redcoats and the Patriots? She said, we saw a video last week. And so then with the next kid that came in, I started with that question. Oh, tell me about your history class. What do you know about history? These are 15-year-olds. Hers was the best answer, right? For the next 10 answers, just blank stares. Then I get to the 12th kid, literally the last girl. It was a girl. It was half of them were boys. Get to this girl, and I said, what do you know about the American Revolution? Just for starters. She goes, you know what happened with the Stamp Act in 1765? It really riled up the protesters in Massachusetts. Then that led to the Boston Massacre of 1770. And then she just goes on and on and on. I said, okay, tell me, where'd you go to school? She goes, I'm homeschooled. Well, I didn't need to be told that. I could have figured that out. But yeah, no. So
but they're also missing that religious aspect, just as even worse.
Right.
That about reflecting, about confession or prayer or anything.
Right.
To get.
And what Scarlet Letter, the novel, does, a fascinating novel. It's readable even today. You know, although it's written in the 1840s, it's set in the 1640s or thereabouts. It's set in colonial Puritan Boston. Hester Prynne, the protagonist, is I think the book starts with her standing on this platform being shamed. She has to wear a scarlet letter, the A, for adultery. How do we know she's an adulteress? Well, she had a baby while her husband was still back in England, had never been to the mainland here, the colonies. And she accepted that. Mm-hmm. She knows that by the standards of her era, she had sinned. And she accepted that. She was very pride. She had a lot of internal pride. I mean, she wasn't going to yield, in a sense, give up her soul to the community. But she understood that by the rules that she knew and that she had played by, she had gotten and deserved her letter. She lived her life, we would say if she was a man, manfully, femalefully. But that was then. Today, there's a whole rash of scarlet letters that are imposed willy-nilly on other people, and you don't even know when you're going to get one when you get one. And in the book, Scarlet Letters, I identified 7. That's because in 2015, as late as 2015, trans wasn't a thing.
Right.
So I didn't have transphobia, but I did have, racism, sexism, climate change denialism, classism, xenophobia, Islamophobia, homophobia. Now I'd have to add the 8th one. But then I had 7 deadly sins, which is kind of neat. And at that time, if you were guilty of one, you would be put on the equivalent of a scaffold and publicly shamed. And it's all total projection. And, black people could shame white people, but white people are even better at doing it because they get to exculpate themselves at the same time. So it's, for racism, say,
right.
Classism or green denialism, whatever. And that's the world we roll in. And it's exactly to the point you made earlier, is that lacking a real God, lacking a real moral order, we're constantly being asked to contrive one and to find new sins. I mean, we have a new sin just about weekly now. Now we slowed down a little bit, but.
Well, it happens within religions, too.
Yeah.
The traditional Catholic versus the, what would you call the
Novus Ordo?
Novus Ordo.
New Order, yeah.
But something like Catholic Charities, for example, penance was you pray to God for your sins and then you do these good deeds, and people would take it upon themselves as part of their deal that they struck with God to be better and to try harder and to do charitable things.
Right.
Well, now it's become socialized charity again.
Right.
Because that they have to, cater to all the secular humanists who identify or whatever, go to church or have a sign that says I'm Catholic or whatever. And now they're down there doing the work on the border. They're just another Red Cross.
Right.
Going, look at us, look at us.
Yeah, and getting government money, too.
Getting government money. They're part of this whole fascism that goes on. But that's the secular humanist, moral relativist, great big religion of humanism that's driving everything right now. When we wonder, well, how could they all come together? They share that narcissism.
Yeah.
And they need that misery loves company. They need that whole group hug thing to feel okay or to get by.
Or to fill the hole in their life.
Fill the hole. The gay pride. Pride ought to be our big clue. When
you're celebrating a deadly sin,
Yeah, and you're projecting that, and you got your flag and all this stuff. I know a lot of gay people who are really good friends who have some religiosity. They just happen to be gay, and you wouldn't know.
Right.
They don't parade around and wave flags and stick signs in their yard. It's just they are what they are, and they get along, and they work it out with their Creator.
Right, and I'm not privy to these one-on-ones with God, between God and a gay person, but I can imagine going to Mass and you're gay and you're committing, what's by Catholic standards, mortal sins. And so you go to church and you just say, hey, God, sorry, I wish I could be better. I'm going to be as good as I could be given the dynamics of my, makeup. Forgive me for this,
But if you don't have that, the sign goes up, the hey, hey, ho, ho, the purple hair, whatever it is that you need to do.
Right.
To make it okay, to salve yourself with the other demigods that are running around.
Last summer on a Sunday, I just happened to, it was just one of those, fortuitous moments. I realized it was a rainy, cool Sunday afternoon in the summer, and I had nothing particular to do. And then I said, I wonder if there's a movie they show movies at the Nelson, the Tivoli has and they had a thing actually on Vermeer. So I said, no, I'll walk to the Nelson from my house. So I feel virtuous and exercising, We do this. We have little ways of secularizing our virtue. And, but it just so happened that in between, this huge block right in front of the Nelson, which is an art museum, was this huge circus for gay pride, right? It reminded me of a carnival. It was that big, and it was that festive. And, it was like going to one of those traveling carnivals and they have them all. But it was huge. And I was, so as I was walking by, you couldn't walk through because there was guards and you had to get a wristband or something. So I had to walk around. And as I was walking around, this news crew came up to me, right, and asked, what do you think about all this?
Oh, man, I wish that made the air.
And I just said, I don't. And then I just kept on going.
Jack Cashill.
He doesn't think about all this,
I was running the...
I actually do think about it a little bit, but...
I was running the multicolored, the pride flag cotton candy stand.
Yeah.
I had the cotton candy with all the colors.
That's good for children. But that is another example of... and it's a good example of the need to fill the space, fill the God space with noise. With noise saying that we're here... what's the expression?
We're here, we're queer.
How does that go?
We're here, we're narcissistic, and we've got an empty God hole.
Yeah, I think that's whose streets? Our streets.
Yeah.
They're filling these spaces.
Yeah.
They're insisting that they're filling these spaces.
If you look at everything that they're lashing out about and you realize, maybe the best one is the climate change green movement. That it's this undefinable sin that mankind. It's the original sin of Americans, and other Westerners.
It ties in because we came in this pristine environment and began despoiling it as soon as we white Europeans got here. It fits together with their.
Of course, every damn person who's screaming about it has got the latest technology. They've got cars. They got all that stuff, and it just doesn't make sense to most people.
Yeah.
They're watching that, going, "Why are they raging at us?" It's like the animal rights activists with the leather shoes screaming at you.
Right. But at the root of environmentalism, let's go deep here into the ultimate first major rebellion against God that was, I would say, sanctioned almost universally in the West. Sanctioned meaning giving the imprimatur, the stamp of approval, was the Darwinian revolt against God. And here's an odd fact that Charles Darwin and Abraham Lincoln were born on the same day.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Not in the same place, obviously, but that would have been February 12th. No, Lincoln was born on President's Day in 1812.
Why don't they change it to President's and Darwin Day?
Why don't they just make it Darwin Day?
Darwin Day. That's probably in the hopper somewhere.
You know what they haven't done, speaking of which, is, like, for instance, they took the Teddy Roosevelt statue out of the National Museum of History.
Really?
In New York City. But the Darwin statues remain. I've been to the one in London, in their Natural History Museum. Darwin is the godhead. He is the wizard. He's the man behind the curtain, except he's not behind the curtain. Because in 1859, with the release of On the Origin of Species, he made it intellectually respectable to be an atheist. Before that time, you were just, sniffing in the wind. You were like the guy at the campfire saying, there's no squirrel god. Now you had a systematic, intellectual foundation for your emptiness. And they ran with it. They never questioned it. It's sort of like the kind of things we see now, like with climate change or COVID. We just say something, and then everything else is the big lie. We say there was no election fraud. Everything else is the big lie, right?
That's right.
You believe in God? Part of the big lie, And it took, you had a class of people, or your basic secular humanists, who were hanging on to Christianity a little bit to keep their parents pleased, whatever. And then it just swept right through there. It's like a wildfire. And it was, we know as little bit about it as we do about the fires at Maui. It was just one of those things that you had to accept. You look at today, reading Darwin's a joke. They all know it's a joke. They all know that his processes of natural selection, random mutation, simply doesn't work in the real world. It doesn't work once they had cellular biology, and they could see that every little cell was its own machine of indispensable parts that you just couldn't add them on over time and hope they kept working. The whole paradigm collapsed. We're not allowed to say so.
It's the infinite thinking. It's secular. It's zero-based versus zero-sum thinking again. And so, it was so comfortable for them to jump into that, because you think about, for a Catholic, for example, how difficult it is for someone who is very prideful,
right?
Somebody who is their own God, who is a narcissist.
Right.
Now, do you want to go kneel before a priest and think about doing a serious self-examination, and then prostrate yourself and mortify yourself and go through all that and then do your penance? Or do you just want to go out with a megaphone and go, "You bastards"?
Right. And I got my get out of jail free card right in your hand. Get out of hell free card. Because now we've decided, in our infinite wisdom, and I don't fault Darwin that much, because he was conjecturing, right? But we've had 100, at least 150 years of more than that, 165 years to prove it. And now still they acknowledge they have zero idea how life on Earth began, right? That's why they're always so desperately searching for life elsewhere to prove that.
Exactly.
That life is random, it's mutation, it's not, there's no creator, right?
The projections that are put onto Trump, that you mentioned earlier, they're just fantastic. And look at what they're doing.
Yeah.
I mean, they'd do the whole Joan of Arc thing if they could get away with it.
Oh, they would.
They'd burn his butt on the stake fast.
And they would find some reason to justify it. It's odd. I was just to that point exactly. I've been reading about the French Revolution for reasons I'll explain someday. But Robespierre, who is probably the leading figure, was a progressive. And so as a progressive, he had led the charge to outlaw capital punishment, right? And then when the question of, well, what do we do with Louis XVI came up, he said, although by and large I'm against capital punishment, we have to make an exception here to have capital punishment. So the left, although by and large we're in favor of due process, the rule of law, innocent until proven guilty, a jury of your peers, impartial jury. No, we don't really believe in that, because for us, vengeance is our God. We have no moral constraints.
Right.
Atticus Finch died a long time ago. Right. He's a vestige of some imagined liberal past. He has no counterpart in the real world. Clarence Darrow, maybe, who is an atheist and a grandstander, but not.
Now, how did the Scopes monkey trial play into this?
Well, that's interesting, because that story's been dramatically mistold.
I'm sure. In fact, I've read about it, and I'm always thinking, I wonder what really happened. Because it's BS if you're reading it out of a sanctioned book.
Yeah, and then what really happened was that in eastern Tennessee, it's a great American story.
Somehow I knew you'd have the lowdown on this, Jack.
Eastern Tennessee was a Republican stronghold. It wasn't part of it was the progressive part of Tennessee in the sense of free,
liberal, classical liberalism.
Right. And so these guys got to talking once that Tennessee had passed a law that that it's a crime to teach evolution, right? The state of Tennessee had. So these guys got to thinking, hey, you know what would be great for our town, right? If we staged a trial here, we had someone who was willing to test it, and then when we'd make ourselves a center of national attention, we'd get great business. It was a great business opportunity. It was a great Chamber of Commerce deal. That's exactly how it started. So they recruited a phys ed teacher to fill in one class and to teach a book called Hunter's Biology or something. Totally racist, eugenicist book, like all the Darwinist literature was at the time. Progressives were leading the eugenicist movement.
Of course.
But at the time, it seems all progressive, right? And so the guy said, yeah, I'll do this, right? And he does. He teaches the class, and then they make sure a complaint is filed. This is all being done by Chamber of Commerce type town boosters. And they arrange for a trial, right? And then they get Clarence Darrow to come represent the one side.
This sounds a lot like the sitting on the back of the bus, that whole deal.
Rosa Parks.
Rosa Parks deal, but go ahead.
And then, although that park, they weren't as enterprising as they were in the town in Tennessee, Dayton, I think it was. Maybe I'm wrong, I forget that. So then they bring in William Jennings Bryan, who is a famous progressive leftist, but who is a deep believer and a deep opponent of the eugenicist movement, right? And so now history, in a sense, would have switched sides if they paid any attention. But they have the trial. In a sense, William Jennings Bryan wins. Then he dies almost immediately of like a heart attack. And then they enshrine the false story in the play and movie Inherit the Wind, which really becomes a metaphor of McCarthyism. And it totally, in which Bryan's a buffoon. He's a 3-time Democratic presidential candidate. And that Darrow is the wise, cynical guy, blah, blah, blah. But it was all staged. But the book is called Hunter's Civic Biology, if I'm not mistaken. If you read that book today in a classroom, you'd be arrested for promoting white supremacy and eugenicism, right? And that was the book that's enshrined in the movie, in the play. And curiously, one added detail, I know too much about the subject, I guess. Stanley Kramer is a producer. He produces Inherit the Wind. Next year, he produces Judgment at Nuremberg. In Inherit the Wind, he's basically advocating for the people who were promoting eugenics, right? And Judgment at Nuremberg, he's advocating for the people who are horrified by eugenics. These people aren't deep thinkers. I mean, you were in Hollywood long enough to know that, but and that's where we are. I mean, that's just scratching the surface of where we are, and the way they preserve their monopoly on our thought processes is a quick aside. Is that the intelligent design movement was making a real inroads into public education about 25 years ago, and then this one school district in Pennsylvania, decided to put on their biology textbooks just one little sticker that said that a Darwinian, evolution is a theory, a Darwinian evolution is theory. We would recommend that other people look into the theory of intelligent design. As soon as they did that, the ACLU came in, found some willing proxy, and sued the school district into submission. So since then, no school district in America dare question their hold. What is the ACLU doing on the side of the
in the
Darwinian
antimatter world in which they live, the bizarro world, that little truth sticker is Satanism to them.
Right.
It's just like your normal person would react to a Satanist sticker on a book that children are reading. It's that out of line. It's that horrifying and threatening and menacing.
Right.
So they have to attack it.
In the womb, so it doesn't. Yeah. So there can be no debate, no discussion in class.
No, it's a sin. It's a crime against God.
Right. Their God.
Yeah.
Their empty,
Yeah.
mindless,
Manufactured.
secular, contrived, multicultural, intersectional, hydra-headed God, Yeah, I know. And so they will protect that God at whatever it is, at whatever cost they have. And to do that, of course, telling the truth, who does that? How friggin' 19th century is that? Telling the truth. I have no regard for it anymore. And they're beginning to pay the price.
It's interesting, though, now that I've thought through this and talked it over with you, it's going to change my perspective as I watch them scream, as they so often do, like stuck pigs about things that make everybody else just scratch their head. It's like, what the hell did I do? I'm trying to get to the truth. And then it's just screams like from the bowels of hell. They go crazy.
They scream because they can't discuss. They can't put their ideas up on a marketplace and have a rational discussion about them. They can only scream and accuse. J'accuse, as
well, it permeates our society now. You can see it reflected in everything.
Right.
It's probably the basis that underlies all of the corrupt institutions we now have. They've all been subsumed by this secular humanist, moral relativist thing. It's narcissism. It's a blanket. It's a mass.
Right. And just to wrap up, and because it sounds like a conspiracy theory, but it's not. I mean, these people, let's face it, right now, they control virtually every boardroom, every newsroom in America, the educational establishment, all universities. They have monopolistic control over Silicon Valley and Hollywood.
DEI, baby.
And not to mention owning the administrative state, the intelligence apparatus, right? There's only a few places they don't control, and they hate those places.
Hate them.
You got the Supreme Court and Donald Trump.
It's a Trump-level hate.
Right. And Upstream with Cashel and Edge, the uncontrollable force in their universe.
I can feel the hate.
Hey, thanks to Real Media who hosts this here. It's a great place. And
it's great to be back, and I love the new place.
Yep.
And these guys are great.
And I hope I look good when we see ourselves.
Jack, under this new lighting,
yeah,
you look, I mean, I'm a man.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of attracted to.
I'll attribute it to the lights.
It's the lights
making you lose your head here.
I mean, you look like 20 years younger.
That put me down to 20 from 40. Hey, we'll see you guys next week. Thanks a lot, Lloyd.
Thanks.
Good show.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.